You're watching TVC Breakfast. Now, since Nigeria returned to democratic rule in 1999, the country has successfully had 4 different civilian administrations at a stretch. And come 2023, the 5th will take the mantle of leadership. Yet, poor leadership has been described as the reason the country remains underdeveloped. Every election season, politicians unveil their manifestos and promise Nigerians the dividends of democracy, but a lot of them have not been accountable. The lack of accountability in governance has enabled many Nigerian leaders get away with all sorts. How can Nigerians rise to the occasion and demand accountability from the leaders? Joining me via Zoom from Abuja to provide answers is the National Director, Center for Real Impact International, Dr. Tosin Olushola. Thank you so much for joining us on TVC Breakfast. First and foremost, help us understand this concept, accountability in leadership, and how important is this concept in our own reality in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for having me. It's sincerely a delight to be here and to have this opportunity. When it comes to accountability in leadership, there's a lot of misconception around the subject of accountability because the moment you demand accountability or raise conversation around accountability, what comes to mind is that you are challenging probably the integrity of the leader, or you are probing into his methodology. However, accountability in leadership simply is the capacity of a leader to take responsibility and be accountable for the resources that has been entrusted to him or her. And these resources can be in form of time, trust, human, financial, material resources, and talking about how important, this subject of accountability in leadership is, in the biblical parlance, it is said that if you seek first the kingdom of God, every other thing will be added to you. I think the myriad of challenges we are facing at every facet of our national life, be it in education, in healthcare, in media, in the military, in virtually every segment of our national life, can be traced to the dearth of accountability in leadership. And it is very essential to the extent that if we can get accountability right, we are almost certain that everything that seemed not to be working will begin to work for us as a nation. The subject of accountability is even much more, prominent when it comes to the 21st century environment. And I think it is important that we distinguish between, rulership and leadership. Because when you talk about accountability in leadership, we first of all are working on the assumption that, the people we are demanding accountability from are actually leaders. Rulers are not naturally by design, they are not, expected to be accountable. They are supposed to lord it over whoever it is that is their subject.
Right.
The king is said to be fallible. You can't query him, you can't question him, but for leaders by default are supposed to be accountable because, first of all, the legitimacy of their leadership is born out of the trust of the followers. And that legitimacy is born out of the fact that the leader is able to effectively communicate the vision, the direction, and at the same time able, to get the buy-in of the followers. And that's what gives him the legitimacy to even be.
Right.
Thank you.
I want you to help us to expatiate or to make us understand clearly whether there is any correlation between leadership accountability and the development of a nation.
All right, thank you very much. I think that's a soft spot for me as an economist. Certainly we can say, that we cannot, and I'm saying that with all sense of modesty, we cannot, live under the illusion that we can achieve development without accountability in leadership. And I think it is better we set the context right. When we talk about accountability in leadership, I think it is important that we all know that, leadership in itself begins with self-leadership. Because when we look at the concepts of leadership and we think, oh, it's those who are in position of authority or those who have been given the mandate, to rule over the affair. Yes, we'll get there because we need to understand the micro dimension of this problem. Every single representative, every leader we have in all facets of life emanated from a family. So if leadership accountability fails, from the family setting, certainly the pool, the supply, for leadership is within the purview of what we know as our society. So if the family works, it then means that there's accountability in leadership at that level. Now, if the society is going to work, that means, the social infrastructure is designed in such a way that it creates avenue and demands accountability. And then if governance at all levels is going to work, be it at federal, state, or local government level, if this is going to work, it must be built on a framework of accountability. Now, the reason is that what we call the rule of law, is actually an institutional framework that is designed to engender accountability by those who are entrusted, with public office, and then to also demand accountability from citizens themselves. So it's a two-way, narrative. So it is important to note that without accountability in leadership, we are not saying anything regarding leadership. Because trust me, if you are going to because economic policy decisions, are supposed to be such that there is no single decision that is neutral. A decision certain segments of society better off, it will make some worse off. So in telling people to tighten their belts or to endure certain level of sacrifice for the greater good or for the common good, which is one of the requirements of a development process, then you need a leadership that is accountable. You need a leadership that is clearly able to communicate the trajectory, for the nation. Beyond that, we also need a leader that is able to give account of all the resources, the trust, the power that has been entrusted to them.
Right.
Such citizens themselves know that, we already have a leader who we can trust. Thank you. Right.
Dr. Tosin, the way we talk about successful leaders, saying the way they expertly do their jobs, we look at some, foreign leaders talk about some other presidents of other countries. And when we talk about them, we say they are expert, they've got skills. So can one then say accountability is a sort of a leadership skill, or is it exactly leadership skill? Well,
I think my perspective in this regard is the fact that, we have very skillful, and there's a lot of literature, that has been documented regarding the principle of leadership and the dimensions or the types of leadership, the charismatic, the effective, leader. But the concept of accountability in leadership, I think it transcends just skills. I think it's a cultural engineering, that, design or that determine what represents the framework upon which a leader is operating. If a leader can be very competent, but not accountable, right? And I can give you a very good example. The very first, survey research I was going to carry out post, graduation from the higher institution, I was part of a research team, and I was given, I put out my budget for the research, and I was actually given the exact amount I demanded for that is needed to carry out that. Now, so I was skillful, I was entrusted with that. I was supposed to lead a team of researchers. But one thing, hit me within that context, within that environment. When they gave me the approval for my budget, the next thing they told me, the accounting people told me is that, this money, we are going to release it to you, right? Of course, including transportation and all of the likes. But there's a caveat in the release of that money that every dime, that you have collected, you have to account for it at the end of this process.
Right.
So we are not saying that these resources is not, or you are not competent enough to carry out this exercise, but so that we are sure that, your leadership is within the context of a structural frame that already designed to accommodate accountability, you already know that, okay, so if I cannot now say, oh, the money I earmark for transportation, I'm using it for communication. So it then means that I'm already, put in a position to be accountable because the institutional environment already has been created for that purpose. I think it transcends skills.
Right. Let's try to expand it further. During the time where we have the president of a nation, especially Nigeria, going ahead to present the budget to the National Assembly, you see every citizen in that country, in Nigeria, let me just stay here, every citizen, following, to the letter, the details of that budget, appropriation. The details of the appropriation rather, and then you see them talking about this without looking at the states they are, looking at the budget being presented by the governor of that state, as much as the budget of the local government. So everyone seems to be focusing on the national budget. So is being accountable a function of the leader alone? Is it something that, or what roles can the citizens play when it comes to, being led and play that role to ensure these kind of accountable leaders emerge as we look up to the 2023 elections?
Thank you very much. I think that's an amazing question. We need, as a nation, we need to de-emphasize this centralized, approach to things. It's very easy to point finger at federal government, federal agencies. Everybody can tell you what's not working as far as the Nigerian environment is concerned. But very few people can tell you, how do you address this headlong? And that's basically relating to this question. Because if you look at accountability, I said earlier that accountability begins with you as a citizen first. As an individual, how accountable are you even to yourself, to your goals, your vision, your aspiration, your personal values? If you are accountable in that wise, and that's why, sometimes we talk about mentoring and or accountability framework or partnerships that puts you in check, to say, oh, yes, I have integrity, I have values, but then somebody else should also put me in check at intervals to know if, I'm living up to this expectation. And then as citizens, from local government, I think the closest level of government, to every citizen is the local government. And, it's unfortunate that some of us don't even know who our councillors at the local government levels are, or even who the chairman at the local government is. I live in FCT, Barry Area Council, where my institution is. I don't know any of the, councillors, for instance. That is because there has never been any framework that is formalized to allow engagement between, citizens and those who have been, entrusted with the responsibility of leading at that level. Now, the local government councillor is supposed to be the legislative arm of the local government. Now, if you take that and, go back to the state level, if the local government works, if the state level works, automatically, and the federal government is also working, then you have a system that is functional. Yes, a lot of narrative have been said about the issue of the structure of the economy itself, that concentrates a lot of responsibility as well as resources at the center. So the structural, defectiveness we have in the system we already run, probably engender that kind of, principle. But in talking about looking ahead to 2023 election, I think it's important that we, expand this conversation to the citizens to begin to demand accountability from, those who they have entrusted. I've never seen any chairman, recalled, a legislature or, a House of Rep member or a senator recalled by, the people, his constituents on the basis of non-performance. That is because, it's almost impossible because those who represent us also have this, almost certain confidence that, yes, I will spend this my 4 years, and nobody, even if I'm not accountable, will hold me to account.
So in a nutshell, we tend to have more passive followers than we do active leaders. Well, they say, you also alluded to the fact that ability to take responsibility is one of these attributes of being an accountable leader. But here we see a certain administration passing the buck, blaming administrations before it of the woes that we are currently in, or the woes that the country faces. So would you say that doing this will be tantamount to referring to such administration or such leader as not being accountable?
Well, this certainly, is the crux of the matter. And I think, in a leadership recruitment process, I think this is the most important conversation, we need to have if indeed we are interested in developing our nation. Because the truth of the matter is, I think even political manifestos, of politicians, is just more or less a routine. Because beyond just even blaming previous administration, we've also had instances where you have, things that are written in black and white in the manifesto, and 7 years later, 6 years later, it is not being done, and nobody is saying why it is not being done. Now, the good thing with accountability is that when you design a framework of accountability as a leader, not only does it engender trust from followers, it also enables them to understand your constraints. Because trust might be constrained by resources, unforeseen circumstances, but to be able to, sign or the oath of office to say, okay, I'm here, I'm responsible for, the level of development, and social cohesion, law and order of this nation, so help me God. And then, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, you are still referring to those who took that office before you. It's like saying that I took an office, in the private sector, to be a lecturer, and then the students are not performing well. And I said, the people who taught them in secondary school is because they didn't do the right job. That's passing the buck. And that's basically, why we are where we are. Now, it's understandable that we have a major challenge. But I think, at the level of enlightenment in terms of citizens' engagement, to know what to demand from those people who aspire to lead them is very crucial in this conversation. Because so electioneering campaign will begin now. People will begin to compare one political party to another. They will begin to cast aspersion and all of that. Right. They will derail completely from the things that are important. So now we need to know what to ask for. And one of those things is that tell me what you intend to do and how the framework you are going to design to engender accountability in the process.
Right. As you wrap up your thoughts, let me put this final question to you. Matter of factly, we've seen public officials disobey, and circumvent the rule of law. We've seen them brazenly act as if there is no supremacy of law over everybody, including the rulers themselves, so to say. So how do we string these missing pieces together? Most importantly, selecting an upright leader as we look ahead to the coming elections.
All right. Impunity will thrive, when there is no consequence for wrong behavior. Every society, the sanity, what preserves the sanity, of every society is what you call rule of law. What preserves that sanity is basically the fact that there is consequence for bad behavior and there's a reward for good behavior. Now, when you have an environment where people, at their whim, they break the law, they disobey, court orders, and there is no consequence. It then engenders, in fact, sometimes there are lots of anomalies that we are beginning to get used to even as citizens. We don't even raise alarm anymore when we see those kind of things happen. We have representatives that come to Abuja and they don't go back to their constituents until the next election campaign is approaching. Now, these are the kind of conversation we need to begin to have to say that, beyond all of this rhetoric, I think it's very important, that we understand that there's a lot of, so politicians believe they can just promise you, I will raise everything. In fact, in concluding my thought in this regard, if I promise you, that I'm going to fix, for instance, the power sector in Nigeria, and I will do that before the end of 20. My sincerity and integrity in the process, because knowing fully well what it takes, the nature of investment required in that sector, that this is not achievable. So it then means that you're just telling me what I want to hear because you just want to have your way. You are not with the intention of being accountable.
Right. Director, Center for Real Impact International, Dr. Tosin Olushola, thank you so much for your keenness of insight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight.